Hey, so I'm gonna read you guys a research paper that I wrote in 2020 about trans rights in the United States, which I think would be interesting to read to you guys considering how relevant it is now. So um I'm gonna do that. All right. The United The United States needs equal protection laws for all LGBTQ plus individuals. Conservative states have proposed that teaching kids about queer issues is a form of indoctrination, and they are trying to make giving trans youth their much needed care into child abuse. While discussions about transgender adults and children, as well as other LGBTQ plus rights, including education, has begun to get traction, not always for the right reasons, but it is important to bring these topics to the mainstream so people can get what they need. However, the way trans laws are being handled by conservative lawmakers and government officials to boost their personal power or party's power by demonizing topics and minority groups that do not know about it is a concern. The two main areas of research for this paper are the legal rights and restrictions trans people are currently facing, along with discussing the ethicality of those laws and how they affect transgender individuals. After researching both sides of the people discussing the legal rights and ethical standpoints concerning trans people, I believe that the people who are pro-trans and pro-transgender rights make a stronger argument compared to their opponents who are anti-trans and push anti-trans propaganda and laws as we see today. In 2022, transgender healthcare and laws in the U.S. has once again brought many voices and opinions to the surface, discussing how trans healthcare should be distributed and who should have access to it. To start off, trans laws and healthcare for minors plays a significant role in the current debates that have sparked up concerning trans individuals, while the opponents, in this case conservatives, are arguing that too many young people are receiving potentially life-changing treatment too quickly and too young. However, it's important to note that cis people of the same age can receive those same treatments, by the way. And, of course, obviously, younger kids are not accessing, like, surgeries and shit. That's just not true. The opponents imply that minors receiving transgender-related care, such as puberty blockers and hormones, can have long-term negative impacts that are not manageable, which, again, not true. They should not be in the relationship between a patient and their doctor. It's ridiculous, especially coming from a government official. This is based on manipulated information and imply that practitioners are administering such treatments without assessing patients' mental health and physical health. They believe that transgender individuals will regret their decision to medically transition, which, by the way, is none of their business. It's between the patient and the doctor. However, the data supports the opposite, right? And they ignore the actual reasons trans people give for detransitioning, which typically has little to do with a person's gender or the fact that they regret transitioning, but from other societal factors. The study released by the National Center for Transgender Equality in 2016 found that about 8% of 28,000 transgender adults surveyed had detransitioned, most of them only temporary. A tiny minority, less than 1% of those who had detransitioned did so, the report stated, because they realized transitioning had not been the right decision. Most cited other factors, though, such as parental or societal pressure. That's from the National Center for Transgender Equality. Instead, the most common reasons for people medically transitioning, either permanently or temporarily, had more to do with the lack of support and demonization from society, unaccepting peers, and family members. Another common reason that transition-related needs can be inaccessible is due to societal ignorance, the lack of education about transgender people, and it being a matter of not being able to keep up with the costs since many insurance refuse to cover their care. Another problem is that they use the point of view of cis women instead of actual trans people in the research. For example, they bring up Keira Bell, a known cis lesbian who has caused a lot of problems for trans youth in the UK. She detransitioned and then put her experience about regretting starting hormones on all trans youth despite her not actually being trans. Another study that was published in April 2021 by Massachusetts General Hospital and the Fenway Institute, a research center that focused on LGBT plus issues, found that about 13% of transgender people have detransitioned. Again, a majority, more than 82% of those who detransitioned, pointed to societal stigma and pressure of fueling their decision rather than regret. Which, according to the study, she would be a part of the small minority, about 1% of the people who did not end up being trans. Instead of focusing on herself and getting her self-care through therapy or whatever, she started pushing to make it harder for trans patients to get access to the care they need. And we can see that in 2023. Obviously, that has had a major effect across the globe, even in the US. All due to the fact she did not get the proper therapy she needed, even though it is already not a straightforward process like she claims it is. Due to this, she now uses her platform to demonize care for trans youth, to scare parents, instead of calling for more in-depth therapy that is suited for the patients, which is already in place. And in the UK, it's years of work to get even into the programs for trans patients. It's not easy. The next issue that comes up is how they compare gender to sexuality, which is absolutely not the same thing. While they can be connected, they are two separate things. They describe getting on hormones or going to gender-related therapy as an easy feat, which is not true, even in the UK, which I just said, but that's okay. The waiting time for kids or adults to get in can take years. Then once they do get in, they're not immediately given hormones. It is important to know that their problems with trans youth comes from the fact that they consider trans people to be lesser than them, and imply that if kids transition, that they are being abused and mutilated. Comprehensive assessment and gender exploration therapy is the most critical part of the transition process, Edwards, Leeper, and Anderson wrote. It helps a young person peel back the layers of their developing adolescent identity and examine the factors that contribute to their dysphoria. Patients reflect on the duration of the dysphoria they feel, the continuum of gender, the intersection with sexual orientation, what medical interventions might realistically entail. From Edward Leeper and Anderson, it is also important to note where these anti-trans laws are being put into place, especially considering the plethora of anti-abortion laws that have started popping up that have put many AFAB people at risk. It is another way they are taking away people's right to have autonomy over their own bodies. Conservative lawmakers are obsessed with AFAB's ability to procreate and consider bodies that cannot do that to be a negative. In a lot of papers concerning anti-trans care for youth, they keep bringing it back to their ability to give birth and their anatomy, implying that they are gross or ruined, which fucked up. Unlike the opponents, doctors, researchers, and trans advocates that argue that gender-affirming care does save lives, because it does. Gender-affirming care for transgender youth works, and the belief expressed by some lawmakers that such treatment is experimental or dangerous is ignorant. Tay Meadow wrote, medical transition for adults has been available in the United States since the late 1960s. The drugs used to suppress puberty in children have been under study since the 1970s. Contrary to what legislators assert, we do know how they work. And as a successive generation of trans people have earlier access to care and support, we have increasing evidence that the earlier they are delivered, the better. As for hormone blockers, the effect of these medicines are reversible if treatment is suspended. Jennifer Finley Boylan, an author and trans woman, wrote in the New York Times in April 2021, by the time these kids are older, the effects of adolescence will have set in. Breasts and periods for trans men, facial hair and deepening voice for trans women. Treating trans kids is not the experiment here. The experiment is in making it impossible for these young people to become themselves. In all these quotes, it is shown that the research does exist. It also shows that it does improve people's lives, and lastly, allows them to live in ways that make them more comfortable, and to get rid of that possibility for people by forcing any mentions of transness will always do more harm than good and will never make those people not trans.